Alright, so today we're going to look at some more Android stuff. Everybody who's in here should have gotten a handout from me. Alright, if you're in this class, you should have gotten a handout from me, and just so you know, that handout is chapter 1 from a book I used for the Android class a couple years ago. It looks like this. It's a Muroc book. I know you're familiar with Muroc. I think that Jim is using Muroc for the MySQL, so you might have your own thoughts, good or bad. I find that most Muroc books, for lack of better words, I equate them to mushrooms. People either love them or hate them. All right, and that's usually the way that it seems to work. All right. So what I want to do is go over this chapter with you, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. And then afterwards, we're going to start to create an app ourselves. I'll show you what the app looks like, etc. It looks pretty much like the one that's going to be in this chapter. But I've got a step-by-step type of thing. I'm not going to give this out to you yet. I will give this out to you before class next Monday. All right? There is, for lack of better words, there's kind of a mistake in here, but we'll talk about that when we get to that point. All right, some of the stuff that's in here I'm just going to literally buzz through because you've already seen it. But there's a few things in here I at least think you should be exposed to. All right, so the chapter, as it says, goes over apps, devices, some history, etc. But I want to talk a little bit when we get to that point about the system architecture and how the apps are compiled and run. So we'll take a quick look at that when we get to that point. All right. Now, you all know about this. You all know about things like watches and whatever, but still most people equate Android apps with either your phone or with a tablet. All right. It's, you know, my wife buys all sorts of junk from QVC and HSN and I don't know whatever else. But almost always one of them, at least once a week, will have a computer thing. And when you watch it, most of it now is dominated by tablets. All right. And they talk in here about different types of apps. I'm not going to go through that with you. You know, they break them up in a bunch of different things. And there have been people, that's nice. There have been people who have said to me in the past, I've got this really good idea for an app. All right, well, again, the idea is you should learn Java first. I mean, I think that's at least a good idea. And if you're going to be writing apps for iOS, you should learn either Objective-C or Swift, or ideally both. All right? It just dropped my connection. I don't know why. They give you a history in here. Again, I'm not going to talk about that at all. If you weren't aware of it, though, as it says in here, in 2005, Google bought Android Inc. The reason that's important is Google is the group behind this Android Studio push. And I think the reason they're behind that is they want their own IDE. They don't own Eclipse. I don't know if anyone owns Eclipse. You know, if Eclipse is a company, I don't know. Again, this is a little bit dated, but you can see some of the stuff that's in here. The versions they talk about, I've talked with you about that stuff. Again, you can see this is behind because this goes through about 2013. In 2014, KitKat, which was 4.4, that was put out there and made available. And now with 2015, really it was probably about the middle half of 2014, Lollipop has been out there. All right. One thing is, and we're going to have to make sure of what's going to happen, I can guarantee you right now, is for the fall semester, everybody who's an IT student, you will have whatever, about a week or so before school starts, whatever is the most up-to-date version of Android, that's what will be out there. All right? And, I mean, does it even exist right now? I don't have any idea. This is the site I went out to the other day and showed you this dashboards, which has the percentage of people using different versions. All right. So what's new? This is new. Okay? And in particular, if I go up a page, you can see it on your handout, but if you look at the picture on page 15 of your handout, all right, and I'll tell you what, I'll leave that up here and go over the author's notes. If you want one thing to notice, if you look, you go from the bottom up. As a developer, you're concerned from the top down, but as far as how things exactly work, etc., that's kind of at least from the bottom up. So you'll notice that at the very bottom, this thing is written in Linux. All right, if you don't know what Linux is really Unix that's free. All right, now I'm keeping it real simple, but that's pretty much what it is. All right, you should never have to worry about doing anything directly in here. If you were doing that, you'd probably be more of a systems programmer as opposed to an application programmer. Okay? All right. Then you've got a bunch of the built-in libraries. It's interesting because this is Linux, and almost all of this is written in C. So when you think about it, when people think about Android, they think, well, Java. All right? They think about running Java in Windows or on Macs. Yeah, but at the very core, it's Linux and it's C. All right? In fact, many things of software that you see written at their very core are written in C, because C is probably the most powerful language there is. All right. Now, the next thing to notice here under the Android runtime, you see this Dalvik virtual machine. Sometimes it's called the DVM. And what I want to mention to you about that is that's not the Java virtual machine. That is a virtual machine that's been written just for Android. And Dalvik is, I believe, named after some town in Finland or something like that, where one of these developers or somebody's inspiration, that's where they got it from. All right? All right. Where you start to get more involved is up in here, in the application framework and in the actual applications. Now, you will be doing work with the activity manager. All right? Will you be doing work with the other stuff? It'll be limited. All right? But they do mention here in the book, and I guess it says page 15 here, but I think on the handout it might be page 12. It says the third layer up contains the application framework. It's written mostly in Java and provides libraries that can be used with the top layer. So for lack of better words, it's kind of a conduit. You're really up here. The stuff that you're working with is up here. All right, and that's really what you should have to worry about. As far as how apps are compiled and run here, and again, on the handout that I gave you, this looks like pages 14 and 15. Let's take a look at the picture that's on the next page here. Because it is a little bit different from what you are doing right now. It says when you develop an Android app, you typically use an IDE. Well, again, for right now, the one we're using is Eclipse. Whether or not that changes for fall, we'll see as time goes on. All right. When you're ready to test a project, you can run it. Figure 1.6, which is the figure you see on your screen right now, shows how that works. It says when the IDE builds a project, it compiles your Java, your .java, into Java bytecode. All right. And it says then it compiles those bytecodes into a Dalvik executable. It's a DEX file. And actually what it really does is it takes your entire project once it works and it puts it into a zip file that's called a .dvk file. So why should you even care? I want you to care, and I want you to hear that for one reason. You literally can take that .dvk file, email it to yourself, to your phone, or to your tablet, or whatever, unzip it, and run it directly on that device. You can't do that with a Mac, because Macs make you pay $99 in order to be able to do that. And that's one of the differences. The other difference is when you sign up to become a developer, at least now, for the App Store, at least now, again, this can change at any time, you pay $25 once, and you're a registered developer. For Mac, you pay $99 per year. All right? There's a difference between those over time. Plus, there's different ways that you can set that up. There are corporate accounts. What I tried to do here was to set up, for the Mac stuff, set up a college account, and I was able to set it up here. What we're able to do with that college account as opposed to what Mac claims we're able to do seem to be two different things. All right. But again, the key thing is if you create something on here, you literally, if you've got a smartphone that's an Android smartphone, you can send it to your phone, unzip it, and run it right on your phone. All right. If you can do that on a Mac, tell me how, because I don't think it's possible. All right. All right. But some of the extensions are different. Again, .apk, .dex, the same kind of thing is happening, just so you know. The same kind of thing is happening as when you're compiling and running your regular Java programs in Eclipse. All right, the extensions, etc., are going to be different, but basically what's happening inside is pretty much the same thing. All right. So they've got this simple Android app, and they say this is the one that we're going to build. So what I was kind of charged with, and this is what I did all day last Thursday, is I said, okay, I've got basically about 2 class periods to try to jam as much of this stuff down students' throats as I can, where they'll understand it, hopefully, or at least be introduced to it, but not so much they'll be like, I don't have a flaming clue as to what he's saying. So I went back and rewrote all this and did a whole bunch of work with it, and let's see if that's good. So I've got the emulator up and running now, and I just want to show you. I think it's Tip Calculator 1. I've got a few versions of this. This is by no means perfect. This isn't the way, but like I said, and just showing it to you in a couple class periods, I figured this would probably be about the easiest way to show you. And again, what I have for you, not right now because I'm still checking on it, is a 21-page PDF that I created that explains step by step everything that we're going to do. And that's what I'm going off of. There is a mistake on here. It's a mistake in a naming convention that I used. I'm going to recommend that even though I made a mistake in my naming convention, you make the same mistake. Because otherwise you're going to have to change your code all over the place. And if you do it the way that I've shown you, you won't have to do that. Well, that's not a great start, is it? It's not showing me anything. Let's see if I can run it again. That's better. Okay, so you come in here, and my bill is $123.45. Right now it doesn't show anything. Again, oh, that's good. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's okay. I'll just go back to here. Not a problem. But what I'm trying to show you is it's pretty much going to look like this. All right? I had a hard time getting the buttons to look nice, so I put them on their own row, so it's going to look a little bit different. The functionality is basically the same. Okay? There'll be a few things that will be different as we go through here because, again, I knew we wouldn't have the time to go over why do this and why do that type of thing. All right, so this is it. They explain what it is, then they go through and they explain to you what the XML in here is. I'm not going to run through any of this. Remember that there are actually at least 2, if not more, ways that you can build an app. One way that you can build an app is you can literally just get into Eclipse and start dragging out things into your work area. Another way is you can write the actual XML to do it. So they give you the XML here. Okay. Then they explain what the stuff in here is. Just a couple things that I want to mention to you. All right. You're going to see this all over the place. You're going to see DP and SP that follow numbers like this. SP, as it says right there, stands for Scale Independent Pixel. Anytime you see SP, it has to do with setting a font size. If you remember that, you're fine. All right? And anytime you see DP, all right, that's Density Independent Pixel. That's setting the size for anything that's not font. All right? So just keep that in mind. Now, a couple things that are in here, just so you know, there's nothing special about the 3460 and the 15%. What the author decided to do was put in 3460, and that's just a value that's put in there as a default value. All right, and the 15% is put in there as a default percentage. As you can probably guess, you can click. If I click the minus sign, it goes from 15% to 14%. If I click the plus sign, it goes from 15% to 16%. And the idea, as you put something in and you click one of these, that should change accordingly. Does all that make sense? I mean, because that's what the whole app is about. All right. You literally can go out on the App Store, or you can go out to to the App Store, the Mac App Store or the one for Android, and find hundreds of these. Many of them are free. Okay. And people always say, well, what's the best way to learn? There are people that literally will put apps out there and will make the code available. That's the best way to learn. The best way to learn is not to run off a 30-page article that talks about all different types of terminology and everything else and gives you very little code. All right? And maybe I've told you about this. The best C programmer I ever knew in my life, Jim Madden, guy I worked with at AT&T, I said, Jim, how did you get to learn this stuff so well? He said, I was really lucky. He said, a friend of mine wrote a game in C and gave me the source. And what I did was I made a copy of it and I ripped it apart. And I said, well, I wonder what would happen if I changed this. Wonder what would happen if I changed this. He said, I got so many blue screens of death you would never believe it. But by the time I got and worked my way through it, I really knew the language. That's how you learn it. All right. All right. So again, they show you all the XML code that's in there. All right. One thing that they're going to mention, it's going to look a little bit, for lack of better words, a little bit funky. Okay, and I just want to show you this. I'll bring the actual program up here. Let me bring up the main activity. That's not going to do much for you right now. This is the screen that's about to come up here that we're going to be doing most of our work with. All right, and looks pretty much like what you just saw. Okay, and there's many different ways that you can build this stuff. I'm going to show you it differently than the way they show it in that handout that you have right there. Why? Because otherwise I have to explain layouts to you, and I could spend a whole period on that, and I don't want to do that. So I decided to create it my own way. This looks a little bit funky. All right, and in fact, I even asked for help from the lab assistant on this because it looks so funky. And he said, I'll tell you what, Jeff, just run it, because I got a feeling when you run it, it'll look right. And he was correct. Even though it looks funky right here, when we ran it, it looked right. It looked okay. When this was first created, this said text view. I don't remember what that said, but it said text view, text view. That was a blank button, text view, text view, text view. Literally the words, text view. All right, but I did not go in here and walk up to where it says tip, for example, and then right mouse click on it, which is one way you can do this, and edit the text. I didn't do that. I could have done that and right mouse clicked and literally typed in the word tip with a colon. That's not the way you do it. Instead, you literally create another file that holds all these strings. And that's what all these are in here. All right, and that file that you'll see in just a minute, that's it right there. And the reason that you do that, this book calls it localization, some books call it internationalization. But the idea is I could create another file that looked just like this, but all these words that you see in here that are English, like there and there, I could run it. I could have another file that ended with -esp. So I had it all in Spanish. All right, and it's not very hard to do, but the bottom line is you should never be hard coding values right into your program like we're used to doing in other languages. So you're going to see how to do that in just a few minutes. All he explains that right in here. Again, I'm not going to run through it any more than that. Then he starts to go through the source code. Just a few things I want to mention here. First of all, and this is not a big file. All right? This is not a big file. But still, look at how many things we're importing. Because I want to be able to do things with buttons, and with text views, and with edit text view. So you've got to import all that stuff into your program. So you do a lot of imports. In fact, in a complex app, you may very well import, there might be 40 or 50, if not more, things that you import in. All right? Then when you look at this looks a little bit different. This is really about the first time you've seen this, because we've got private, but notice these. If you want to create a button, it's private button and then the name of your button. If you want to create a text view, and a text view is like a label, and edit text is like a text box. So why didn't they call them label and text boxes? I didn't write the language, so I can't tell you why. But they gave them their own names. Okay? And there's some other stuff that we're going to be doing in here that's going to look a little weird. I mean, if you look at something like this. Whoops. This line that you see right here in blue, that line. Literally, what it says is go out and find the XML where you've got this text, edit text set up, and basically create for me the text box. And that's what it's doing right there. It's called inflating your GUI. And when you do that, you look at, okay, that sort of makes sense. Remember I mentioned to you last week, I said never go out to these files that are in here that start with R. Someplace there is an R file in there that has that in it. All right? And again, the reason that it's done like this is what I told you before. There are some people that use XML to write all of their interfaces. So it's got to run through this so it can create the interface based off of the XML. It does this whether you've created your interface via the XML or you just dragged and dropped components on there like we're going to do. All right? All right, some of the stuff that's in here should look familiar. Action listeners. What this is going to do, basically, it's going to say, hey, when we click a button or we do something, we want something to happen. So we're going to have to write our own action listener. For every time we key something into the thing with the amount on it, or every time we click the button with a plus sign or click the button with a minus sign. Okay? And that's basically an explanation. So let's take a look at a little of the code. All right, if there's nothing in that string, if that thing is totally empty, so in other words, when we go to run this, if there's nothing in here, if we were to try to do a calculation now, we get an error message. Does that make sense? Because there's nothing in there, and we're trying to do calculations. So if I click plus and minus, I don't want it to blow up. And it's not blowing up if you notice it, because it's automatically setting that value to 0 for me. All right? So if I come through here and type in 100, all right, and then go up or go down, you can see that it's working. All right? Not sure why it's not immediately catching that, but I'm not even worried about that. Point is, you can see, at least right now, and if I put a different value in there, all right, that it's going to have the right values. All right, and I can keep going down. So well, that must be an error. Yeah, that's using his code. Yeah, that's an error. So probably I'd want to set that up so that it couldn't go below 0, and maybe it couldn't go above 25, as an example. But as soon as you learn that, and as soon as you learn how to do that, you start thinking about it, that's a lot of work. So what we're going to end up doing very quickly in the class is creating what's called a slider control. So you'll have a slider in here that'll be set to a minimum of 0 and maybe a max of 25, and it'll be one of those things that just looks kind of like this, except there'll be a circle here. You drag the circle back and forth, and you set your tip that way. All right? Ideally, when you're writing an app for someone, you want to make them do as little work as possible. You want to give them a lot of bang, but you don't want to make them have to do anything. And if you assume that the person running your app is an idiot, you're actually better off. That's not meant to be funny or mean or anything else. And you say, well, yeah, imagine they're a little kid. No, little kids typically can run apps a lot better than adults can. Because little kids aren't afraid to make mistakes. And they'll try anything until they get it to work. I mean, some of the code you should be able to look at. This says basically if I press the down button, subtract a tenth of a percent. Why a tenth? Because we multiply it by 100 later. All right, or add. Okay, and then the last thing they really talk about in here that's of any consequence is they talk about this manifest file. So again, we can look at it here. It looks like this, but it's got a lot of important information in it about the program. Okay, it lets you know all sorts of different things. Something as simple as screen orientation. You can put that into the name of the app, all right, the version of it that you're using, etc. It is totally possible for you to write Android apps and never touch this file, or you might touch it a lot. As you get more and more comfortable with this, you go in there and do whatever you want to do with it. Okay? All right, now, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say from here. Yeah, the rest of it, yeah. But I just wanted to mention one more thing to you, because it looks a little weird, for lack of better words. But when you're working here, and I'm going to bring up this activity main, okay? This is the activity main file. And that's with the graphical layout. If you see where my mouse is, way down towards the bottom of the screen. If I click here, that's the same file, but that's it in XML format. And the reason I'm telling you that is virtually everything that we work with here, the strings file, there's the strings file. There's the other version of the strings file. I don't like that one. I find that one just a pain in the butt to use. So sometimes when I do work, I use the XML file. Sometimes I use the other file. You can do it either way, and it's whatever one you get used to and whatever one you get comfortable with. Does that make sense? So if you haven't done so already, do two things. First, get in and start up Eclipse, if you haven't done so already. And we looked at this before, click Window, go to Android Virtual Device Manager, and set up your emulator. All right? And if we do get to the point where this all works and we can get it to work by next time, maybe if you ask them real nice, John will be nice enough to pass out the tablets, and we can see if we can hook one or more of them up. We get them to work to the tablets, and you can see what they look like run on there. And if not, there's a fun little game you can play on there. Okay, the question was, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're working with XML or you're doing it the other way. All right. Basically, by default, it'll do a relative layout, which just says put stuff in there. Try to put it wherever you placed it. All right. But there's different layouts, and we're going to walk through all that stuff in just a minute, so you can start seeing some of the differences between them. All right. So I take it that everybody was able to go down, start up Eclipse, and then go to Window, Virtual Device Manager. You should have all created that emulator before we did it, and then click Start. Mine's already running, so I'm not going to start it. All right, and don't worry, I'd rather have it started and let it run for a while, and then worry about it later. All right. Now, I haven't tried this because the version of Android that all of you are running is the version that we had at the beginning of the semester. It's possible that we're going to do this. I've done one upgrade. It's possible when we do this, we could have some problems. I don't know. That's why we have a lab assistant. Actually, to be fair, John's done, he's done a yeoman's effort to try to keep this stuff working, etc. All right, and Terry even said that he wants to work with you as far as setting it up regardless of how it's done for fall. Even if it means that you do it before the end of the semester, you just come in sometime when you're actually working, and you know what I mean, as opposed to having to come in on your own. But that's what I told him. I said, talk with him because he knows a lot more about it than I do. All right. So I'm going to give you my steps. before we start, just so you all see this, and no, I didn't show you this first, but just so you see it. There is a folder out there with today's date on it. Okay? In that folder, if you dig through this thing with the source code on it, that's the project. So if for some reason you fall behind or it doesn't work or whatever, okay? All right. So what else is in there? Well, every time I did something, I took a screenshot to use in this PDF, I saved the screenshots. So they're in there. So you've got about 15 or 16 screenshots. There's some articles that I found on this. Some of them are on Eclipse. All right, but what I tried to do was give you some information, so if you wanted to find more out, you could go take a look at it. These are the author's PowerPoints from this book through chapters 1 through 4. I'm not going to go over any of them, but at least you have them. Okay. Source code I already mentioned. This thing that says and P_CH1, that's the hard copy I just gave you. All right. This dashboards, that's the thing I showed you in class last week that as of mid-April had the percentage of people using each different version of the Android operating system. Okay. This beginner's guide to Android architecture. That look familiar? So we just saw in the book. This is what, that's the URL that they reference in the book. So I just grabbed it, and because they go through every component much better than I just did. So you've got that. All right. Just so you know, let's see, where is it? I think it's in here, but we'll find out. So under articles in here, there is a PDF that's called How to Create. That is that 21-page thing that I created. All right. The problem is if you start watching that, what's going to happen is Luke's going to be on step 3, and Ben's going to be on step 6, Paul's going to be on step 4, and then nobody's going to be listening. You're all going to be doing it on your own. Why? Why do I say that? Because that's what I do. All right. I have no doubt that that's what a lot of you in here would do. All right. So I'm just going to bring it up. So start Eclipse as we normally do. Close any currently running Java programs you might have opened. Do a file new. All right. So I'm going to close mine. So I'm going to close everything. Starting brand new. File new. Remember when this comes up, some of yours might say Android Application Project right there. If yours does not say Android Application Project, then go down to the bottom where it says Other. And there, if you open up the Android, the second one that's there is Android Application Project. All right. Go to Next, and that brings us to right here. We're going to call this what it is, which is a tip calculator. All right. And we're going to change, and we're going to set up for the package name, again, very similar to the way we've been doing it in the past. I'm going to recommend for the minimum SDK, set it to about 14. I think that's what John had recommended. That's ice cream sandwich. All right. So basically have your screen so it looks like mine, except your package name will be different. Anybody else? Any problems doing that? Remember, you can have blank spaces in here. That name where it says application name, that is if you decided, that you were going to market this thing to the Android Play Store. That's what it would be called. All right, this name right here is the project name. There cannot be blank spaces in there. And within the workspace here must be unique. Notice I already have a tip calculator 1, so if I put a 1 in there, all right, it's giving me that little X, and it's letting me know the project name must be unique. You already have one by that name. All right. The package name, again, we've already talked about that in other classes. This is our minimum required SDK. We could leave it at 8, which is what it was, but we're just going to set it to 14. API 14, Android 4.0, ice cream sandwich. All right, that says that this should run in any version of the API, the application program interface, from version 14 upward without any kind of problem. You have no guarantee that it will run correctly in earlier versions. So the advantage of taking this and drilling all the way to version 1 is then it's available to everybody. The disadvantage is it might be very hard to use a lot of the newer features with it. All right, so we're kind of going in the middle. This target stuff, yours may or may not be the same as mine. Even if it's not, it should be okay. All right, and you'll notice for themes, you don't get a whole lot of them. None, hollow dark, hollow light, and hollow light with dark action bar. And really, when you first got it, when they first set this up, there were no themes. Then they made hollow dark. Then they made hollow light. Then they kind of made a hybrid of the two. So that's what you've got in there. You literally can go out and download themes, some for free, some for which you pay. You can go and create your own themes. We don't go into that much, having only one class in this, we don't go into that much detail on how to do that. All right, so with all that stuff set, click your next button, and that gets you to here. I have yet to go out and find anywhere online that gives a good explanation of what's on this screen, other than everybody says when you get there, just click next again. That's usually the explanation that you get. Now, by default, when we run this, by default, unless told otherwise, when we run this, what's going to happen if we click next, and I'm not going to yet, but if we click next right now, that's the icon that we're going to have whenever we run it. I don't want that icon. So over here where it says image file launcher icon, click the browse button. And you're going to have to peruse your way over to here. To the P drive for this class with today's date. The in-class folder. So if you find your way to there, don't click anything after you get there, but just find your way there. That's good. If you do find your way there, if you look up on the screen here, one of the things you should see down there at the very bottom where I've got my mouse resting, it says tip calculator. That's a little JPEG or a PNG, I don't remember which it is, and double click on that one. So if I click on that and click open, or if I double click on it, that changes this. See that? Now if you didn't like that, you could go out and find your own icon. All right? And there's only one that's there, but it automatically resized it for me. This is the kind of thing, again, that if you were going to create this and actually sell it, you might either use something, Photoshop or something, and create your own customized icon for it. All right. So we're there. We've already configured our icon, so I'm going to click next again. This says what kind of project do you want to create. Virtually 100% of the time, we're going to just leave this and choose create activity and blank activity. We're going to click next again. This is the name of the activity and the name of our layout. I'm just going to recommend that until you've got some practice with it, just leave it the way it is. Notice that if we screwed up any place along the line, we can back up. All right? But now we can't go forward because we're at the end. So if I click finish, boom. Now we've created the project. There's nothing in it right now other than a little text view that says hello world on it. It'll take a minute for it to come up. So right now, you don't have to do this, but if I went into the file that we've just created in here, which is tip calculator, not tip calculator 1, but my tip calculator, if I right mouse click on it, choose run as Android application, and I come back over to here, this should change fairly quickly, and it should just have a text, the equivalent of a label on there that says hello world. In other words, there's not really very much to it, but that's what you get by default. All right? It's taking a second, and that's fine. So if you look up on the screen here, so what I've done was I went through that page. Again, I purposely put a lot of screen dumps in there. That page, that page, that page. And we're now... All right. So when we come back, we're going to take a break, and then I'm going to lean on John, and he's going to help me talk about a little bit about Eclipse perspectives, and then about Logcat, and about the debugger. So it's 10:46. I want to make sure I've got time to take this that I'm working on right now, and produce it. So let's come back at 5 after 11, please. I'm only going to go until about 11:30. All right. What we don't get done today, we'll finish up next class.